Thank you, Steve. Really looking forward to this panel today, talking everything about data. So the data landscape, it's incredibly complex, and it does feel like it kind of changes almost on a weekly basis. It's very difficult to keep up with all of the latest news and what's actually happening around privacy. So, for example, you know, we've read extensively about the sunsetting of cookies that's going to be coming imminently next year. Then we had the news that Flock is being replaced by Topics, which means that first-party data now is the key thing that brands need to think about, and they need to enhance and enrich that data. And then, of course, coming across the horizon are other initiatives. The ID solutions, clean rooms have been mentioned, that they could be possible solutions in this data environment. So the key thing is, what do brands and marketers, advertisers need to know? And the great thing is we have a fantastic panel here who will be able to tell us all of the things that we need to know and all the latest updates. So without further ado, I will let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Zaid from Pubmatic. My job is really working with brands, helping them to optimize their supply across programmatic. Nice to meet you all.
Good morning, all. My name is James Cameron from Integral Ad Science. I run our global strategic sales, and here at Integral, we're looking to try and help our brands and our agency partners drive greater media or value out of their working media.
So, hi everyone, I'm Liz Salway, and I'm day 4 in a new role at EPAM. But I'm going to take the sort of advertiser view today, having spent the last 3 years in the Nestlé Global team working on their digital competencies. So yeah, nice to meet you.
And I'm Sarah Faust. I'm Head of Data and Analytics at the Kite Factory. We're an independent media agency, and my role there is to ensure I'm helping clients get the best measurement solutions and make the best use of data in their marketing.
That's Dr. Sarah as well. So. Okay, that's great, thank you. I would like to leave some time at the end for questions, so please do note them down as we're going through. And there is a roving mic. If you just obviously stick your hand up if you want to ask something, then they'll come over to you. So we'll kick off. It would be good to look at what's going on in the media, in the digital data landscape at the moment to get all the latest updates. And actually, we thought we'd start with Liz because she is obviously coming from the Nestlé brand perspective, just to tell us where the brands are at the moment.
Yeah. So I think we'd probably get a mass exodus if we start talking about Google and their plans. So for me, there's been an increasing kind of move across the industry because, let's face it, we're on a continuum with the cookie, right? So for first-party data from a brand perspective being crucial for future strategy, but also the opportunity around second-party data with, you know, good publishers and retailers as well, who are, you know, seeing a huge increase in the investment that they're seeing. And obviously they have a huge amount of first-party data and developing clean rooms, etc. So for me, you know, there needs to be a balance as well from a brand side on, you know, with the CPG, your lack of rich first-party data, how you get around that, and also not getting too obsessed with collecting it because you are still mass marketing, and focusing a bit more on the insights generation you can get from partnerships in media.
Anybody got anything to add to that?
I think it's obviously very important to gather insights, as much of it as possible, to inform your strategies later on. But I can also, you know, add a different view to that from a SSP perspective. And I think if you look at the market, right now digital advertising is at an inflection point. It happens, you know, every few years. It's happened a few years ago with the cleaning up of the supply chain. There was calls for bringing trust and transparency. And, you know, these things happen every often when a big event happens or it takes place and it completely changes the course and directions that we're going in. So right now, what we're faced with is obviously data is being completely disrupted. You've got the advent of alternative IDs, cookie deprecation. You've got the emergence of clean rooms as well on the one side. And then on the other side, you've got you know, consolidation happening on both sides of the ecosystem. So publishers, for instance, are consolidating and being incredibly selective of SSPs that they want to work with. buyers are doing exactly the same through SBO, and they're looking at things like, really reviewing and assessing the tech capabilities. Does this partner, produce, and can they sit alongside my current tech stack? Are they interoperable? Can they work with the new and latest developments in data that we have available today? Can they work with clean rooms? So all of those different aspects. So what that means is that, from my point of view anyway, working in an SSP, is that it has placed an enormous amount of focus on their capabilities. It's exciting from a marketer's perspective, because now you've got SSPs bringing their technology into the buy side, right? And, and almost organically, we're slowly disrupting the status quo. So rather than work with, say, a DSP to overlay data, you can now do that on the supply side, right? And we've done that. We've done some tests where, beg your pardon, where we set up a campaign with exactly the same parameters, both on the DSP as well as SSP. And what we found was that we were able to deliver much greater reach, in fact, twice as much reach and performance. It's a new economy that we're in at the moment, and it's just opening up more options for marketers to consider.
The challenge that we're facing as a media agency is that there's a lot of data already being lost. There's so many opt-outs for cookies now. Apple have caused huge issues for us, and our brands are asking, well, how effective is our campaign we're running right now? So we are interested in what Google is saying they're doing next year, or whenever they delay the changes to actually happen, but we need to have an approach in place to be able to measure what's happening now. And so we're turning a lot more to brands' first-party data for that, so that in our reporting solutions, instead of relying on cookie-based measurements, conversions from ad servers and from various platforms, that we're actually looking a lot more to the data that the brands own.
Mm-hmm. I think we'll come back to how we look at enriching that as well.
I think from our side, we're trying to remain impartial for both sides of the fence, the buyer and the seller and our media agency, as well as from a platform, whether that's Facebook, Google, or programmatic buys, and look at it from a slightly different perspective and say, well, we know that the market's changing. How can we, as an independent organisation, look to try and understand what is actually going on across everything that goes on? And our approach is actually looking at context. What is the context and the relevance of that page? And what's the sentiment of that page? And what are the emotions of that page? And with the advent of technologies that are enabling us to do that now, and we're not the only ones doing this, but we're able to then start to classify and look at all of the ecosystem that all my colleagues have spoken about today, and start to understand, well, okay, if I can classify content by sentiment, by emotion, and by suitability, through the studies that we've done, we know that roughly 71% of UK respondents for this study that we've recently done, shameless plug, it's on our IAS Insights blog, but 71% of those people are much more favourable and receptive to seeing much more relevant contextual information alongside their advertising. So we think context is a huge play moving forward.
Yeah, it's kind of going back to not forgetting, some of the solid fundamentals that you would have had in planning before. And I mean, there was a panel yesterday talking about TGI, which is a very traditional way of starting to plan, but it still has its value. Panels are still important, and actually, from a brand perspective, a really poor user experience from a retargeting use case can be quite damaging. So even though it can feel a little unsettling at the moment that some of the marketing use cases are a little unclear in how they're going to work, I think overall it's better for the consumer and it's better for brands, because they don't want to be associated with that type of poor application of, third-party cookie. Mm-hmm. So,
Sarah, you mentioned back to basics to me before.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've touched on TGI there, Liz, and as a media agency, of course, we have a TGI subscription, and we spend a lot of time investing in the research there. And the reason it remains a really valid planning tool, as does YouGov, which we use in a similar capacity, is that the insights that you get from it are applicable to your planning. So often we work with brands who have done their consumer research, they've gone away, they've asked loads of questions and they've found out loads about their consumers, they've got all this data, and then they just come to us and dump a huge PDF and say, buy these people. And they're just not the right kind of insights.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure when brands are collecting data about their consumers and about how the kind of consumers they want to interact with more, that it's applicable when it comes to media planning, which is why we end up going back to TGI.
Yeah. No, I think that's such an important point, actually, because there remains it's changing, but a bit of a divide between the CMI team and how they do their research and how they develop their portraits, which are very unactionable in media. So as we develop more towards, say, clean room analysis of different data sets, having them involved in that, because they're the data scientists, let's face it, in many cases, that can then go back into planning, which will give you a much more actionable audience segment to find. So it's kind of forcing everybody just to up their game. And I think that's ultimately, a good thing. And it's also supported by, the tech improving. AI within the context of context is better than it was before. It's not just keywords. It's, So yeah, I think instead of feeling really kind of unnerved by it, I think we should be a little bit more positive and optimistic.
I think we really do need to embrace technology. It is here now. Let's use it. Let's test and learn. We have worked with clients who have test and learn budgets, and I'm sure a number of you out there have the same thing. And we just suggest and recommend that trying to look at these elements and use the latest technologies and see if actually they work. Because what we're talking about here is, all of these things are readily available now, especially when you start to overlay context and sentiment when you come to planning and buying.
Yeah, I think we should absolutely always be looking at new technologies and what they can offer. I think using what is available now to supplement maybe the tried and proven methods is a way to move forward, but don't completely scrap what has worked for you to replace it with something new that you're not completely sure of. We've done a survey recently with Digiday that said out of the buyers that we surveyed, we asked what their number one cookieless strategy is. Number one on that list was first-party data. Number two was contextual. Number three was zero-party data. We spoke about this the other day. And then number four is publisher data. So that's interesting. It's just a guide, I think, for marketers out there to maybe look at and start to assess what the available options are, speak to some of the vendors, maybe some of your existing partners that you're already working with has a new technology, get them to come and talk to you, and then go from there.
Yeah, but again, I think the obsession with first-party data collection from brand side is one that I would guard against, because what do you do with it? And you're sacrificing maybe other ways of driving business outcomes if you're just looking to collect first-party data. So you have to link it back to the analytics and start to understand, what is that record actually worth to me? So it's not just this, I must collect first-party data and it's a vanity figure, we have X million records or whatever. It's like, so what?
Yeah.
What to do with it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's just a guide, like I say. And first-party data, I don't think will ever be enough as a single scalable solution. It needs to be supplemented with something else. So publishers these days can tell you far more about your consumers, the users that you're trying to reach, than the brands themselves, because they've got so much valuable data sitting on their site. If you look at someone like Future, they've developed a product called Aperture, for instance. They came to present this to us. We talked to all of these different vendors, and the amount of data that they're sitting on is extraordinary. Intent data, affinity data, their own first-party data that they've collected that they are now sharing through partners like us to make it accessible for buyers.
The only challenge with that, of course, is limited to Future. And if you think about a client who's, not everybody has huge amounts of first-party data, let alone, to Sarah's point earlier, when you're planning and buying, you can't just buy on Future. And by the way, this is no dig to Future, but when you're thinking of planning and buying for a country or a market, one needs to think much broader and wider and take into consideration all the elements that we've spoken about, inclusive of the contextual relevance of a page.
Absolutely. I mean, I was just using Future as an example. I'm just saying, I didn't say just work with him.
No.
We work with hundreds of publishers. So.
We were told to be a little bit rough with each other.
I'm going to break it up if it gets fisticuffs, so don't worry. It won't get that bad, hopefully. So, okay, so what advice would you give marketers when it comes to collecting, activating data?
I think just start with the end in mind. Think about the overall objective, what you'd like to achieve, and then start with that. Because there's so much data out there to collect. You know, the market is completely fragmented. If you think about all of the different touch points that you can collect data from, there's search, there's transactional, there's your own conversion data, you know, there's third-party data. Think about what your strategy is, what you'd like to achieve, what your, you know, KPIs are, and then work with that. So one of the sort of newest pieces of data that we're very excited about, if you think about CTV, for instance, it's an emerging, you know, sort of marketplace, lots of excitement around it. We are talking to our brands about content object, which basically allows them the ability to target users based on the programming that they're viewing. So you can target people contextually on the TV screen now, you know, and this is phenomenal. This is a new piece of data that wasn't available before on linear TV. So if you're doing that, as an example, think about, I guess, the purchase funnel that you're working on. So it's going to be a brand awareness reach activation. That's what you're going to work with. If you're looking to drive consideration, maybe look at category targeting. If you're a CPG, looking to target coffee lovers, as an example. So there's lots of different ways to look at it.
I think, my advice would be don't go too niche with what you're trying to do, because yes, there's loads of available technologies and targeting techniques, but often we find when we have discussions about, we could go after these people who do this, who've already done this action, you end up in these really micro audiences where there isn't any scale, where ultimately we are marketing and we're trying to grow our brands, and to just be mindful of how you're going to use the data that you collect and the scale that sits behind that.
I mean, I think the advice would have to be kind of split across D2C brands, where obviously there's a completely different set of use cases and value exchange there. So, getting your house in order to, you know, work out how you're going to connect everything from your rich CRM data. And I mean, it's very challenging now to activate that. Like CDPs are great for certain use cases, but you don't have the scale. So, you know, for me, it would be about partnering with other data sources to try and deepen your insights to feed back into planning. And from, you know, a CPG point of view, really think about what value you're going to get from all of that, you know, effort to gather the first-party data. And let's face it, it has to have a value exchange, right? So if you're in pet care, it's clear, you know, people get engaged with that content, and you should invest in your content territory so that you know why somebody would engage with your content. And then newsletters and that kind of thing are relevant. But really, from that person, all you want to know is that they're a pet owner. It'd be great to know if they're cat or dog, but you know, you can tell by what they're reading what kind of things they're into. But yeah, so it's just balance the obsession with the data collection with your actual planning and need for scale.
I think I'd like to add is that, again, to the point earlier, we have lots of different brands here. Some have first party, second party, some have no data. So it's trying to create an agnostic framework that you can plan and buy media campaigns and also then measure the efficiency. And one thing we haven't spoken about a little bit about is the use of keywords. And historically, that's always been a very strong and powerful way to often mitigate risk or brand risk. And you know, there are solutions out there that there's no need for using keywords. So there's a question around the whole sentiment piece that comes to what my learning colleagues have talked about here, but also then thinking about, to Zed's point, is it brand, is it performance? And obviously those campaigns and the CPM costs of those will be very different. And what is the outcome of those? And so a recent study that we recently conducted showed that when you align contextually relevant content with engagement and outcomes, and that's a topic that's been talked a little bit about, we've seen it almost up to 3 times incremental lift on that when it's contextually relevant and it's highly engaged by time and or viewability of that specific ad. So I think we just need to start to think about those in more ways for the future. Omni-channel.
It's interesting. I was going to say, is that your number one targeting tactic? Contextual.
Be careful here. You know, the market is in change, right?
Right.
Historically, we've used things like keywords for lots of reasons, but there are technologies out there now that mitigate, and there's no need for those for the use of keywords within reason now. What we need to do is a good job as a market and as an industry, both buyers, sellers, agency partners and clients, is make sure that we're all comfortable and confident that the technology works. So therefore, we don't need to use keywords, and therefore the benefits to everybody is incremental reach. Back to that 71% that I talked about earlier.
Let's talk about enriching first-party data. What do marketers need to know about it? How does it help with their media planning? We've talked about this quite a lot. There's lots of interesting insights you have on it.
I mean, we saw was it Habu yesterday? Tim's. I don't know if it was anyone saw that yesterday. I thought it was really good. But yeah, I mean the thing with obviously, you know, I suppose Google came up with it really with their ads data hub, right? Just take in data. You need somebody who understands how to query it, right? So it's like everyone was obsessed with big data for so long. It's like, but what do you do with it? I don't know how to cut and slice it. So clean rooms provide the right privacy environment for all of that to happen, again, with the right people behind what they're trying to do with it. But what I have seen as a challenge with that is that, you know, yes, once you find maybe insights from it or matches with somebody else's data, say, you know, either a retailer or, you know, increasingly the likes of Channel 4, etc., are doing things like this with clean rooms. How do you then go and activate that? You know, so you still have the challenge around identity. So the ones that are the easiest to actually do from a data point of view are within the walled gardens. So you go into Google and you can do some of that work, but then you can also go out and activate because their ID doesn't have to be obfuscated in their own environment. Same with retailers. So in a way, it's kind of forcing everyone to, well, I suppose we are anyway, work within walled gardens and do what we can within their functionality. Because there is no solution out there that allows, you know, it to be matched across the ecosystem. And we have to kind of just work with what's possible and what's not possible. Much as we don't like it, it is what it is. When I'm talking about measurement and or inability to really have an open way of working across reach and frequency, etc.
I do think it's important that we try and diversify away from the walled gardens, though, and not invest too much in Facebook and Google. There are other ad tech, other opportunities, other data vendors out there that we could be working with to help, I guess, supplement and complement what we're doing. So if you're a brand and you need to build, you know, a brand persona, I'll take a page out of your book. You know, you can speak to other providers about enriching that data. So if you have your own first-party data, you know, you could use contextual targeting. It's one for you, right? You could have own data. You know, there's information like Mosaic information, demographic data that you can get to help build those and enrich those user profiles. So I would, you know, I wouldn't urge marketers to just completely invest themselves in the walled garden. I think that will be a very scary place to be if the internet was just completely run by Google and Facebook. And it keeps a lot of other people in jobs as well, right? There's other tech companies out there, there's other data vendors that is working more in a sort of open ecosystem, you know, that I think is looking to make the open internet better for everyone and not closing it off.
No, I agree. I'm not saying that, but it's not where anyone wants to be. But the reality is they have got the majority because it's easier and in a lot of cases less expensive. Say, you know, having done tests across first, second, third party data from a, you know, audience on target point of view. So, you know, investing in test and learn to do that. The truth was Google data was the most efficient, you know, so you have to come down to that as well. So, you know, we all want the open internet, but at the same time, we can't keep railing against the reality of certain things that are not going to change.
Do you think that a marketer's job should be for them to be challenged in maybe finding different points of views, different solutions, alternatives, rather than sticking to, you know, I'm not saying they're not, but if you were to go and only work with the walled gardens, surely there's a very sort of limited view of the world that you're living in?
Yeah, sure, but I think, I mean, you know, you're on the media planning side. You know, most media plans I've seen have tended to be very heavy in that direction.
We said yesterday, wasn't it? Is it 60-40 of the media budget was on social?
Well, look, I mean, it's going to be dominant. I'm not, you know, debating that, but I think it's important that we look at other, you know, other opportunities.
Let's not pretend we don't know why that reason is, though. It's pure performance based.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because the data works. There's Facebook absolutely dominated in the lookalike space and making use of first-party data and extending that to just give me more people who look like them. It may be a black box. We don't know how they find it or what data they're using to do it, but it does work, and it has done. And there are other suppliers who are getting better in that space too. But yeah, let's not pretend it's not getting the budget because it works.
Donald Trump would probably agree with that. He ran his whole campaign on Facebook. So.
Absolutely.
I'd love to open up to the floor, particularly while we're on this topic. Gentleman at the front there.
Hiya. Big thank you to the panel. It's a really interesting and natural discussion. I just wanted to ask the panel, given the fact that IDs are in question, cookies are going away, how important is GDPR compliant data transparency in the supply chain if we want to continue to have an open web? That's really for Sarah and Liz.
Yeah, it's really important that all of you, any data that you're using is compliant with GDPR. No business can afford the risk of getting that wrong. Something that Zaid touched on was zero-party data, and there's a lot of buzz around that currently and its value, where if anyone doesn't know this, that's where people are willingly handing over their data for purposes for you to use. So not only do you own it, but they've actively opted into using that data, and that's kind of a really good way to build out personalization. If someone tells you that they like cats or dogs, then you should use that information. And there's a bit of a value exchange there in that. So the growing of zero-party data, I think, is huge in that space because people are willing to trade their data for a better user experience.
Don't quote me on this now, but there was a leak about Facebook's ability to actually apply GDPR. Did you read that? I haven't read the whole report. It was actually just this morning someone shared it with me, and apparently, I mean, please don't quote me on this, but it is a bit like Swiss cheese, that there are lots and lots of gaps there. And I felt that, having come actually from that side, from the SSP side, I don't believe that anyone is actually doing it right necessarily, because it is, you know, from a brand perspective, you can be totally sewn up, right? Because you have more control. But as soon as you're in an RTB environment, there are too many unknowns, known unknowns and unknown unknowns. So, you know, I think that if the ICO or any of the other global bodies actually knew what they were looking for or how to do it, I think the whole thing would come into a little bit of an emperor's new clothes, like that actually none of this is working very well.
I think the fact that, can you hear me? I think the fact that Google dropped cohorts in favour of topics, which is essentially contextual, is a bit of a kind of glimpse into whether or not that the data is GDPR compliant, which for me, the next question is, are brands changing their KPIs to reflect the fact that these performance type metrics are going to go away because of cookies? Like, we're seeing a lot of brands still doing what they've always done because cookies are still here. So
no, they're not changing their KPIs, basically. People still want the same results. We're just having to find new ways to measure it.
Question back.
We're out of time. Can we ask what? I've got a guy at the back. He literally hasn't put his hand down for about 5 minutes. So go for it.
Sorry, Ian Dowds from UCOM. First-party data would have us believe that TikTok and Facebook have absolutely no under-13s on their platforms, which patently isn't true. At the other end of the scale, you've got someone like Joe Lewis, who's ex-chair of the Media Research Group and very involved in cross-media measurement for ISBAR, openly saying that every time he logs into a VOD platform, he identifies as a 112-year-old non-binary person. How are any people who on the stage who are using first-party data, how are you validating it or calibrating it or auditing it, or are you just all taking it at face value? Because I think it's a dangerous route to go down, that first-party data is a silver bullet.
Are you talking about, say, TikTok's first-party data, their logged-in user, or...?
Their first part, you can't log on unless you claim to be 13. So and there's Ofcom data that says there's a significant number of under 13s on TikTok. So my point is, first-party data doesn't come categorically squeaky clean, and anybody can claim to be anything as they log in to publishers or advertiser sites. And everybody is taking, that's first-party data, therefore it's pure. And it worries me that there is no element of calibration or auditing of what people are claiming first-party data to be, and they're just putting it together and going, it's clean. And I think there should be a health warning, and I just wonder if anybody has a way of calibrating or auditing the first-party data that they are receiving and taking as gospel.
No brand has whose data I've ever seen, and we do some data consultancy to help with segmentation and lifetime value work, and I've yet to see a brand with completely clean data. There are things you can do. You can filter out people who are under certain ages and over certain ages because they've been able to put their date of birth was yesterday or in 200 years. And so there's some things you can do that are definite data cleansing before you action the data, but also it's important not to obsess on those kind of anomalies in the data, because most of it is okay, and you can get a lot of valuable insight from the segmentation work that you could do from that.
I would also have a lot of concern about the 13. I find that uncomfortable also, but I honestly don't know how you could audit it, because if it's not verifiable data, it's just ticking a box, you can't control for that. So it is a concern from a brand point of view, I would say.
Great, I'm going to tie this up now. We could go on, and I would say do grab the panellists in the break. We're about to go out because they are fantastic. So thank you so much. That was a really illuminating discussion. Really appreciate it.